Thank you for watching the Tank Museum's YouTube channel, and don't forget to subscribe.
Okay, this is a Morris Light Reconnaissance Car. It actually comes from a family of vehicles that were produced in about 1940 in an effort to stem the possible German invasion. And most of them are completely useless. But this is probably one of the better designed vehicles. It came a little bit later than the others and was had the advantage of being built by a well-known firm and had quite a good cross-country performance given its sort of layout. But anyway, it's an interesting vehicle to look at. It's got powered by a Morris 4-cylinder engine that's located here at the back. It's an engine of 72 horsepower. It's driving to a 4-speed and reverse gearbox, but it's driving to only the back axle. This particular vehicle is driven on one set of wheels only. The front set are purely for steering. It's therefore a 4x2, 4 wheels, 2 wheels driven. And the front suspension is quite unusual. It actually has coil spring independent suspension for the front wheels only. The back wheels are ordinary leaf spring, but that's one thing that sets this vehicle out. It was actually presented to the Tank Museum by Morris Motors as an example of the sort of work they did. It's an example you want to keep quiet about if you can. Now, the thing had quite a good cross-country performance. That's odd for a 4x2 vehicle. Normally they don't have, but this is due to the fact that the entire underside is sheeted in. It's pretty well flat. There's no sort of bits of chassis hanging down underneath at all. So it will always more or less skate over the roughest bits of ground. It gave the vehicle a slightly better performance. The actual crew layout is even more peculiar. It actually has 3 men in it, all of whom sit side by side in effect. There's a gunner sitting on the right here. He's got a Bren gun, as you can see, in a rotating turret. It's open slightly at the top, but it's basically a rotating turret. The man in the middle is the driver. He's the guy to feel horribly sorry for. You can say that I've driven one of these things, and I know that you're sitting there driving the car with your legs stretched out in front of you because the pedals are on the same level. There's nowhere to sit. You're actually sort of sitting as if you're flat on the ground. And it really is an uncomfortable vehicle to drive. Now on the left is a third man. He can operate through a hatch in the roof, which is provided there. It's a 2-opening thing like that. And it was designed to take a boy's anti-tank rifle. That's a 5.55 single shot bolt action rifle. It's completely and utterly useless. It can't penetrate any armoured vehicle worth the name. It really is completely useless. But they were supplied with these vehicles, a Bren gun on the right and the boy's anti-tank rifle on the left-hand side. The boys could also be mounted through a slot in the vertical face of the hatch when it was opened, or it could even be fired through a slot in the back hatch if you wanted to fire over your shoulder, perhaps in a Parthian shot at anyone who was coming up behind you while you were running away. But that's the vehicle. It's a welded construction. It's a 14mm armour plate, which is quite good for its day. Most of these vehicles are a lot lighter, but it was really built a little bit too late for the emergency that it was meant to represent. Most of the vehicles by Humber and by Standard had already been produced by then, and it was really built as a backup for them. It's a welded construction, so it's much more up to date than many of the other vehicles that were classified. You see it has doors in the side which give access to the crew compartment, but it really is an uncomfortable vehicle to travel in and a useless vehicle for fighting. They were used primarily for training. I've never been able to find any connection between these vehicles and the Reconnaissance Corps, which is how I'd like to have it marked if we could, but without a vehicle or an example in reconnaissance corps service, we can't. But anyway, it's quite an unusual vehicle to look at, but almost completely useless. There is a Mark II version, which is a 4x4, that is to say it's driven on the front axle. Now this version, the Mark II it was called, had leaf spring suspension, 4-wheel drive. It had a secondary ratio fitted to the gearbox, so that in top ratio, normal ratio, you only drove the back axle, but in low ratio, the front axle was brought in, and that's how 4-wheel drive was achieved. It's a bit higher at the front than the 4x2 version. You'll notice that if you see it, it sits up a little bit more, but basically it's the same vehicle, same armament and everything else, but it's the Mark II with 4-wheel drive. So it does add a little bit more excitement to the story. But that's the vehicle, really. There's not a lot more you can say about it. It's as I say, powered by the Morris engine. Top speed is said to be about 50 miles an hour. Well, I tell you what, I wouldn't like to do 50 miles an hour in it, but never mind. That's what they say it could do. But I've never, apart from the fact the Royal Air Force used a few of these cars in Tunisia and places like that, it was hardly used at all. They started to use them a little bit after Normandy. After the landings in Normandy, you'll find a number of them serving with the Royal Engineers. Usually it's the 4-wheel drive version, but it gives them a little bit more scope. What they were doing with a car that was designed for the emergency of 1940-41, still operational in 1944, I really don't know, I can't believe it, but they kept a number of vehicles on which they should really have scrapped and used proper armoured cars in their stead. But they didn't do that. So we've got a few of them, like the Mark II version of this thing, running around in 1944. And in fact, I took one of these to a show many years ago now. And while we were there with it on display, a chap walked up to us and said, "Oh, I remember these." He said, "We used them in Palestine in 1946, we'll say 45, 46. So they must have seen service after the war. You'd really think they'd done away with them by then, but oh no, they were armoured vehicles and they kept them going a bit longer, and that's how it was done. But I think they're really daft to do it. But there we are, that's the vehicle. And it's in good condition otherwise, but not a runner anymore because I think Morris Motors took care of that before they gave it to us.
We have a fantastic selection of books, models, clothes and other gifts on the Tank Museum online shop. When you buy from our online shop, you are supporting the Tank Museum charity, and that means we can carry on caring for our collection and producing this content. If you have supported us already, thank you very much, subscribe and do keep watching.